Especially the sound. There we go. Up to wonderful EKG stuff, and voila. Come on, come on. There we go. Oh, 4 minutes behind time. So, this is basically the physiology of the heart. I scanned, this is inevitably, there was good and bad and in between. On the 12 or 13 ones that I scanned so far, I would have to sort it out. I mean, most people have an idea if they did okay or they did poorly. There's going to be some give backs. I have to go through the test again and see maybe three or I would say at least three I have. And I'm going to mark it correct so I got them wrong. Because I felt that there was ambiguity. And a couple of the students asked about it, so I'll get on it. I mean, I'll give you an idea when I go through the ambiguous ones. You understand, we have a couple more people yet to take the test. And manage taking it down. So that from Wednesday, if we can get a few more people done, if you want to ask me privately, I'll try to have a list handy with me before. It'll just be raw scores. I won't have necessarily processed. Well, best I can say for the time being, as always, could have been better, could have been worse. A couple, no, couldn't have been. Moving on. So, we'll deal with that. Well, I'm sure we should have everything sorted out by the end of the week, I hope. So, contraction, relaxation, or systole and diastole. This is all about the cardiac cycle. And so, basically, to understand exactly what goes on, I think is really the quickest way to summarize it. And we look at what goes on. And basically, the cycle starts when the heart is completely relaxed. When the heart is completely relaxed, it's after the ventricles relax, and at that point, blood starts to flow back from the heart, back to the heart, because when it's contracted, effectively, at the very least, the atrioventricular valves are closed. And basically, what happens as the ventricles relax, and we start to get some filling in the atria, those atrioventricular valves will open. At the same time, at that point, remember that the pulmonic and aortic semilunar valves are already closed. So the heart starts to fill. So that probably happens in mid, as they describe here, mid to late diastole. And then the heart fills. And really the important measures are how thoroughly it fills, what they call the end diastolic volume, and how effectively it pumps out the amount of blood it's supposed to pump out, which surprisingly enough is less than you would think. So really, for the heart to be totally efficient, it pumps out 57% of what it's filled with. Each ventricle contains about 120 milliliters of blood. That's 4 fluid ounces. And it pumps out 70 milliliters. And leaves 50 milliliters. So it's only pumping out roughly 2 1/3 fluid ounces from each ventricle. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it does it constantly. And the whole idea, and that is efficiency, as far as the heart is concerned. So I mean, you can start with those numbers as sort of a jumping off point. Typically that surprises people when we find out how little it is, but not for how often the fact is just constantly pumping. So it starts in mid to late diastole, and we really start, there's really no pressure in the system. And 80%, 96 milliliters, more than 3 ounces fills passively. So with the assistance of Venous return, with the assistance of gravity, the fact that the aortic and pulmonic valves are closed, boom, it's filling. And then at the very end of diastole, what signals it is the P wave. At that point, we generate atrial depolarization and subsequently systole, contraction, and that slow, steady, rate-determining step kind of contraction for a tenth up to a fifth of a second basically tops off the tank, as I always express it, 20% blood. Sum total of less than an ounce, 24 milliliters approximately. That is the end diastolic volume, and that's the critical piece. What you're going to see is something called Frank, proper name, Starling, another proper name. the hyphen between it, long, which is basically just a reminder that we have to stretch. Muscles do better when they're stretched to their optimal distance to contract. It kind of goes back to that 80 to 120 we talked about in muscles. So as long, and for the heart, that Frank Starling principle, it indicates that when you're at the appropriate end diastolic volume, you're stretching the heart to just right so that it can eject what we call the ejection fraction, that roughly 57% of the blood. That's the way it works. Back at the ranch, finally, pardon. Mini frescoes, that's all I had at Chai Eagle. They were out of the big ones, so what are you gonna do? So, magically, at the end of that, once that P wave is finished, what's next? QRS complex, and boom, very, very rapidly, the ventricles not only depolarize, the atria are finished, and now the ventricles are going to become systolic. They're going to start to contract. It's relatively rapid, as you will see in the slides, and I'm going to really spend most time with in this section. It starts to immediately pressurize the system. It effectively becomes a closed system, becomes a fixed volume system, because as soon as those ventricles begin to squeeze, that effectively ventricle that's filled with blood, assuming the valves are competent, and that really is a pivotal piece, that pressure immediately is going to close the atrioventricular, the bicuspid and tricuspid valves rapidly. The first heart attack. Almost. Every so often, the demonstrations don't work. So and now we begin to pressurize the system. The next step that occurs is that's pressurizing is going to build up enough pressure in that system to overcome the residual pressure in the blood vessel that is maintaining the closure of the aortic and pulmonic semilunar valves, particularly the aortic valve. That roughly starts at the resting pressure, which is the bottom number of your blood pressure, known as your diastolic, and the single most important measure of any when it comes to the cardiovascular system. It's the resting tension that's in that blood vessel. And once it overcomes that, the blood will rapidly start to eject and expel itself against this very, very strong blood vessel. So strong, and what maintains its strength, and a remarkable feature that you're going to see shortly is the fact that it's known as remember back in anatomy, we talked about elastic or conductive arteries. It's filled with elastic connective tissue. When it pushes in there so rapidly and opens those valves, and out it comes, it's like a trampoline. Expands those, and as long as the blood is egressing, it's being forced out, it keeps them expanded until finally the ventricles relax and it begins to spring back. And that rebounding phenomena produces a magical moment that not only basically takes away from an extraordinarily turbulent kind of flow, it makes it a very useful, very elegant, continuous flow that maintains the pressure between 120 and 80. It also slams back shut those aortic and pulmonic valves. Second heart. So it's a little more tame with that. So I'll try. 3 people smile through the whole thing. I know it's late in the day. You know, a little too much stoicism here. Okay, I had to use the word. I haven't used it in a sentence in at least 3 weeks. I think your vocabulary should improve. So, this is the ISO, the atria relax, the ventricular pressure, close the valves, boom. Very, very rapidly, when they close, so that phase is split-second period when the ventricles are completely closed, volume remains constant, the pressure rises quickly, and eventually you'll force those valves open with the pressure rising to, we're using the 120 over 80. You know, and obviously it varies with the individual. And then it relaxes, that's a T wave, polarization followed by diastole. Then we have another important measure. How effectively we're pumping it out, the end systolic volume, ventricular pressure drops, causing that black backflow in the aorta and pulmonary trunk particularly, and that's rebounding phenomenon. And what it does is it's sort of a double whammy. So not only does it slam those valves shut, you might remember me talking about this when we talked about blood vessels in anatomy. Not only does it slam them, doesn't it? Not only does it prolong the flow going outward, if you will, away from the heart. At the same time, it slams those valves shut. It bounces back, like rebounds off those valves, just like waves coming into shore, and effectively that promotes a secondary pressure wave. We measure the pressure in the aorta, and we notice the phenomenon as it drops, all of a sudden it jumps back up. This is something called, as you will see here, the dicrotic